Welcome to this week's True House Stories, coming out of New York City in my studio right here, Current Power Records. And I finally got this guy to agree to do today's program. And he's multi-talented. I've known him a long, long time. I've seen his name in the 80s. And I remember he worked with Justin Strauss on some initial remixes and production stuff that he worked on. And I know he's got a integral story. He's also one half of Frankie Knuckles' sound, director's cut that you all know. You know, this is the guy behind it, the magic box. We should say the Pandora's box. When you open the box, comes this little guy with a keyboard ready to play and rock you. It's a DJ. It's a producer. He's probably got more #1 records on Billboard for remix than anybody else I know. Lucky him. And as well, he's family life, he's a studio owner, he's everything, entrepreneur, and he's been going for a long time, and he's going to tell you his story, which is the good thing about True House Stories. Each and every week we get some great people. And of course, I'd like to introduce Eric Kupper to my show. Thank you, Eric, for doing it, brother.
Thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it.
And I hope I was right on some of the things. I know the Billboard thing, I'm not sure if you're the #1 guy, but you're pretty close.
I don't know, but I have a few. I got it. Yeah,
you got more than a few, brother. You got a lot. You got a lot to make anyone envious, and it's in a good way, in a loving way. You know, you've actually done a lot for our music business. You've been involved with Def Mix Sound for a long time, and I know you did a lot of keyboard work for, David Morales and Frankie, and I know you worked with all of them as well, and a lot of great producers. And also, you've had tremendous hit records too, if I remember correctly, Rupaul, and a lot of great records on your own. Hysteria is your record label. But of course, I'm going to let you tell your story. But I will start with the first question, as I always ask everyone, and everybody knows that watch this show, is, as a young kid, where does music find Eric Kupper, and how does it begin?
Well, yeah, man, music has always been an integral part of my life. My family, actually, from the old country, on my father's side, were musicians. My great-grandfather was an opera director, traveled all around Europe. My grandmother, on my father's side, was a concert violinist. Her brother, who I never met, he passed well before I was born, was one of the first jazz violin players. So I come from like a family of like violinists, basically, and opera directors, So my father, although he was musically inclined, he just didn't have the impetus to learn an instrument really well and play it, but he was an audiophile. So we sat around listening to records. I mean, I had a dope mono system back in the day. It was a Bogan amplifier and a General Electric preamp tube, you know what I mean? And so I was listening to records when I was a little kid, man, always just absorbing the music. And, playing instruments. My grandmother had a piano on my mother's side. So every time I was over there, I would play around with it. And eventually, when my other great-grandfather died, we got his upright in the house, and I started taking a few lessons here and there and just twinkling around. And always had a set of bongos. Even when I was a little kid, I had a set of bongos and would set up a fake drum set, like with little things, and play along to records and stuff. So, man, yeah, music, it just never... I can't remember a time where I didn't just constantly listen to music and was, when I look back at it, I was analyzing it even back then.
Really? So before, so we know that you're a prolific keyboard player.
I'm a synthesist, let's say. Yeah, I don't have like the piano chops of like a Terry Burris or a Peter Schwartz or one of those guys, but
pretty good. Come on, dude. You played a lot of records. Come on.
Yeah, no, I know, but I'm just saying, I'll hire.
The one
if I want
the one finger guy? Come on, you're not.
If I want a dope jazz piano player, I'm going to hire Terry or Peter or something like that.
Yeah.
Play on my records. but Satoshi's hired me to play on his records too for my sound. So it's just like, different sound and stuff. But yeah, I consider myself more of a synthesist, and bass line's a specialty. Yeah.
I hear you.
And,
I hear you.
but yeah, no, I think the reason I do good bass lines is I also play the bass guitar, so I have a feel for how bass works within an arrangement, just from playing bass and jamming around with people, and kind of realizing that the bass. I always say the bass. How can I say, the drums are the bus, but the bass drives the bus. So yeah,
it's important.
I play a few instruments. I play guitar. I play keyboards. I have a drum kit set up in my kitchen now because I'm not having any dinner parties anytime soon. So I ripped them out of storage, and been messing around and enjoying setting up a new kind of home studio setup, where I used to have a big studio with everything mic'd up and ready to go. Then I downsized. Really, like, all the director's cut stuff was done on a laptop, believe it or not. Everything, no analog gear, a USB keyboard, and a laptop. That was it. And now I'm back into incorporating some of the, ripping some stuff out of storage. I got a little more space now, and setting up a proper, interesting kind of home setup where I can record live instruments again.
Yeah, because I did hear you had a phenomenal studio in your house at one time. A few people.
It was insane, man. It's funny, it wasn't like the great big console or anything like that. It did have a console, but it was like a Mackie. But what it did have was like 40-something analog synthesizers. I mean, true analog, not to mention the digital analog hybrid stuff. It was like, and tons of outboard gear. Because back in those days, you needed, you were running stuff live or printing the tape. But even so, you needed a lot of gates. Unless you wanted lots of hiss and hum, you had to have 24 channels of noise gates minimum. You know what I mean? So unless you happen to have an SSL, which I think you have, and you have it on every channel anyway. But
yeah, but you got noisy channels and they need to be gated. You know that, especially with the tape. You know that.
Yep. And if you were running live, like a lot of us were before, I had my first multi-track system. I had 24-track ADAT, like a lot of people. It was the first affordable way to, record at home. And then when hard disk took over, suddenly a lot of that outboard became a little redundant. You didn't really need noise gates anymore. You could just chop out the stuff in between, and But yeah. But it was a pretty decked out studio, and I kept all the really cool pieces. And some are in storage, and some I rotate over here.
That's awesome, bro. But before we even get to the director's cut, I want to know the 80s for you, because that's when I remember hearing your name. Because was it a rock band before dance music started? Because I couldn't remember the story that you told me long time ago.
Yeah.
Okay, you got to give me the story again. What happened? How you met Justin Strauss? How that all happened? The introduction of walking you into the dance. So I think it was him that walked you, because I remember saying, Eric, where did you come out of? And you said, well, I think it was Justin Strauss, and you got to tell the story. Tell it.
Yeah. I don't think it was Justin. It was definitely Justin. But
well,
I didn't go to clubs before that, but he introduced me more into the house realm. But see, I was playing in a band. I guess I was still in high school, and we were kind of like this, almost like a no wave band. They had this kind of a reaction to new wave that was kind of punk and sometimes atonal and sometimes jazz and sometimes funk and whatever. And we were playing CBJBs and all those kind of places. And like a lot of bands, it seems like you take a band like The Jam, they became Style Council. They became a blue-eyed soul band. And that's kind of the progression we took too. We started writing these more kind of soulful pop tunes. And we had a band together at the time, and we were playing around New York, China Club, and Nirvana, and all the kind of places you could play, Bleecker Street, And a friend of mine, bass player from my old band, went to high school with these two girls, and one of them was dating Justin. And we also, the bass player of my band knew Justin just through the club scene because he lived on the Lower East Side. And we used to go to clubs like Berlin and Pyramid and all those kind of places. Ivan was playing at Pyramid. And so we were, in the club world, but it wasn't really a house thing yet. We're talking about like 80 to 84, But Justin and his partner Murray Elias, they had Pop Stand Productions, took an interest in our band. And we had a development deal ready to sign with RCA. But then we lost our singer. And then we tried, it's one of those, classic scenarios, the deal that didn't happen. But what did happen is from being in the band, Justin had asked me, how would you like to come in and play guitar on a session? I was like, okay, I could do that. And there was a keyboard there too. So, well, we need a bass line, so let's rock a bass line. Okay. And that record actually was a Bill Nelson record. Bill Nelson was the guitarist for Bebop Deluxe, which was kind of a prog glam band, for lack of a better way to describe their music, from the 70s into the early 80s. And I was a huge fan. So I was like, oh my God, I'm getting to play on a Bill Nelson record. And from there, we did that recording at D&D, if you remember D&D.
Sure I do.
A lot of great records came out of that studio. And yeah, we were working with this young engineer at the time named Andy Wallace, who ended up being one of the biggest engineers in the world. He mixed this little album called Nevermind for Nirvana.
Right.
And his career just went crazy. I mean, you look at like almost every great rock record from that period on, and he was involved in like at least half of them. But yeah, so that was kind of it. It's like he got me in the door with the studio. Things started to work out for him and Murray. And they brought me in more and more and more. And before you know it, we had a little team. And that's when he was playing me all these records, all the early Chicago stuff. Stuff was starting to filter in from the UK as well. And of course, some New York stuff. And we were part of that. And the big difference between me and a lot of other keyboardists around the New York scene is a lot of them thought they were above it all. They were like, this is like simple crap and I'm not really into it and blah, blah, blah. And, it's just a 2-bar loop, stuff like. I was like, no, this is dope, man. This is cool. This is the new frontier. This is fresh and I'm feeling it. So I think that's what kind of, spurred my career. It got me to work was the fact that I actually loved and felt the music and wasn't in the session begrudgingly like some other people were.
So from the new wave side, the dance music thing, you really it took you locked into it. You really understood it right away when you heard it.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, again, I already was buying like 12 inches of records by like Loose Ends and Strafe and all like the R&B stuff from the early 80s that was starting to, come out on 12s. I didn't have like a bunch of South Soul records around yet, but I was leaning towards more of the early 80s kind of slickly produced stuff, Cerrone and all that stuff. I was already buying 12 inches of it, Thomas Dolby. I had a bunch of 12 inches of his, Human League, all those records at the time.
Don't you want me, baby? I try to tell people those days in New York, even when I was DJing, you were playing that amongst R&B dance music. Like your night was playing across the board, most clubs.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, that record, I credit that record sometimes as the first crossover record, Don't You Want Me? Because BLS played it.
Right.
And it was the first record of that ilk I remember hearing on BLS.
Everybody around the world, that's WBLS, where Frankie Crocker was the program director, who took major, major strides and chances. And that was what we would categorize as a white dance record. To be
exactly, I don't want to say I'm
glad you going to a white dance record, meaning English. It's got a digital sound to it. It's not a Philly or a New York style record, and it was a big club track that he heard and he rocked it on regular daytime play. That was huge for that. That was big.
Yep, and that was a really big moment in crossover music and crossover dance music for sure. But so, but there were, again, there was always great dance music. And I remember hearing one record that always stuck out was Robert Palmer, Looking for Clues. I used to hear that at clubs back in the early 80s. And dance music was dance music. It didn't really matter whether it was Tom Tom Club or Philly, or it was just dance music. But I mean, and that's still how dance music is to me, quite honestly. Of course, we have house music proper and all the different subgenres within. But when I play, when I started to DJ more seriously, and I joke, I've only been DJing for 20, 25 years compared to all y'all who've been DJing for like 40 years and stuff. But when I first started, I was playing very eclectic sets, and it wasn't like open format, but I would play Talking Heads. I would play a Kirk DiGiorgio techno record, and then I'd play a Philly soul record. Then I mix tempos and I mix genres, and that's to me still what drives me.
And everyone, that would be a night at Danceteria.
Exactly.
Just like that, Mark Kamins, he would take you across the board, everything.
Mark
or Justin Strauss at Roxy, not Roxy,
yep.
at his club.
And Ritz at the Ritz area.
Yep.
He was the Ritz area, and Mark was a huge influence on me. That guy, he influenced everybody.
Oh yeah,
I mean, every major DJ used to go to see Mark to hear what he was going to play, because he was on the cutting edge. He was taking all this, getting all the early stuff from Belgium and from Europe in general, and playing it before anyone. And I mean, I remember every DJ going to check out Mark just to kind of do their homework.
Yeah, well, you had what we call the go-to guys. He would be one of those. You had Bruce Forrest at Better Days. You had Larry Levan. You had Mark Kamins. You had, there was the key guys in New York that if they played your record, trust me, everyone is searching for your record now.
Yeah.
And in those days, it was all about getting to the shops, and digging and hunting hard as a collector, or if you're a DJ playing at your club, you wanted to have that track. And a lot of times it was a matter of a producer like yourself bringing something to someone like myself or another DJ, and we would have it months before it was still in production. You guys are still making the record saying, don't give it to nobody. This is only for you, because I know I gave it to you. Do not give it out, because we're not done with it yet. Because then that's all you had to say to a DJ. Next thing you knew, the thing was all over the place. So, I told you don't give it out. I told you don't give it out. But we all learned that lesson the hard way, don't we?
Yeah, well, and back then we're talking about, if you were lucky, you'd get a DAT tape and transfer it to reel to reel. Otherwise,
it was more reel to reels you were bringing to guys. Just say you walk
and or cassettes. The Whistle Song was originally on a cassette that Frankie transferred to reel to reel. So, yeah.
We'll get to that in a minute. That's Sound Factory era. But I want to get to that, because I want to know the first major sessions that you started in New York and who you worked with. I know you worked with Justin, his partner. So where does it go from there? Now you're starting to be getting your own 2 feet and loving this 2-bar loop thing. Where are you going? It's like,
sometimes 1 bar, sometimes 4. But yeah.
Well, 2 to 4 to 6 to 8. We get that. But where is it going from there with everybody?
From there, it just, the studio work with Justin and Murray picked up. And then I think the next person who called me, it's a good question. I could actually check on my database, but one of the first was Richie Jones. Richie.
Oh, yeah.
Richie is best known in the dance music world for his work with Degrees of Motion, Shine On, and Do You Want It Right Now? But he's done a ton of other things, everything.
Oh, yeah, he's been around a long time, Richie.
He's done everything from great shameless pop music we've done together to seriously underground records. In fact, we just put out one on Hysteria this month, the Sophia Rabina record, the Calling You, the cover of the Baghdad Cafe record. So I think that it was him there was a few around the same time. There was Mark as well, Mark Kamins. Basically, I started getting calls because people like what I did with Justin. So there was Mark Kamins, there was Arthur Baker, Richie, and then the call came from David. And from David came Frankie. And
the definite story begins.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I always say I've worked with almost every DJ once. I don't think I ever worked with Bruce Sparse, though. But I did work with Shep a couple of times, and I worked with Junior a couple of times as well. But they really had their own guys. I was just kind of standing in because someone couldn't make it or whatever. But yeah, I mean, it was such a vibrant time in New York. I mean, you remember, and talk about Arthur and Shakedown.
Oof,
everybody hung out in Shakedown, and everybody met each other. That's why I met Lenny D there and Victor Simonelli. Simonelli?
Victor.
Simonelli.
Everyone from all the Italians out there. That's Victor Simonelli.
Yeah, I just put Lenny D and Victor together because together they were a duo at one point.
Yeah,
so I did Victor Simonelli.
Lenny D and Victor Simonelli.
Yes, exactly.
But tell us what the Shakedown story was like for you. What I mean, because here's what you have to understand. They see your records, they're like, wow, he's so talented. We know you're around a lot of talented people too. What's going on in New York? What was that electric feeling at that time? Like, what was happening?
Man, it was a buzz. You know, you were there.
I know, but
all the record shops. It's like in the course of a day, you would hit a record shop or two or three. Then you'd end up in the studio. And in that studio, you're bumping into everybody who just maybe was passing through to say hi, there to book a session for another time, or maybe in the other studio, like Shakedown had 2 studios, Quad had 3 or 4, you know, there was just this, you'd be in the elevator at Quad and Tupac would be there. And he actually got shot once in the lobby there, but it was just this scene of house music and hip hop at the time was massive. So there were studios like Calliope and D&D, which did a lot of hip hop, and INS, where I worked at. I worked at INS a lot. And basically it seemed like between us and the house guys and hip hop basically made that studio happen. There wasn't much other kind of music going on. And I'd say that holds true for D&D and definitely Shakedown. I mean, you know, there was pop music going on at Shakedown more because it was a bigger studio. Had a nice SSL in there. But man, yeah, it was just a vibrancy and everybody mingling and then seeing each other at the club after the studio and maybe bumping into each other at the record store before the studio because you want to buy some new records, maybe bring them to the studio and check them out and maybe get a vibe, you know? So, yeah, man, there was a buzz like I cannot.
That synergy was incredible during those days. There was so much going because not only did you have that, you had all the record labels in the city in New York City at the time. Yep. That was what the killer was. Not only were you clubbing to hear the songs or going to the record shops and running into people or going to the studios and running into the artists, but then if you had a really hot record, you call up somebody, listen, I'm going to run to your office. I want to play you something. That I missed. Oh,
very true. Yeah, I mean, I used to do meetings. I used to take trips to LA just to hang out and meet with all the record people. Yeah, you know, we did meetings all the time and just vibed and, hey, I got something I think you would be good for and that kind of thing. And yeah, you know, or you might have something that you're pitching to a label. And yeah, those days are, you know, I mean, the days of developing things on major labels is drastically diminished. You know, you used to be able to give them a seed. Yeah, you used to be able to give them a seed of something, and if they felt it, they would sign it to at least a development deal. It's very difficult to get that done right now without like a certain amount of Spotify numbers already and YouTube hits and stuff like that. It just seems like it's all there's a lot of work that the artist has to do for themselves, which is cool too. You know, it's a different method now. But I kind of miss those days of artist development.
Well, can you explain that to someone that's looking at this as a bit younger, what that really means? Because you've been in a couple of those deals in your career. You know, what that really consisted of, a true artist.
Well, here's a pretty grand example. I'm a huge fan of the artist Kate Bush. She's a British singer. She's made a lot of milestones. She was the first British singer-songwriter who wrote her own songs to have #1 records in the UK, to still have a #1 album. I mean, she is a seminal artist. I got to work with her once, which was actually a thrill. She got signed when she was like, I'm going to guess 16, 17 years old. But they waited. She got brought in by David Gilmour from Pink Floyd, produced some or helped out on some demos, and got her a development deal with EMI. And in the development deal, they gave her dancing lessons. They kind of groomed her as an artist. They let her write. They let her kind of get things together. So by the time she was 18, 19, she put out an album that was great, you know, especially as a debut album. And that kind of thing, you just don't hear about labels doing much anymore. It's there was possible reasons because of her age at the time that they waited till she was older. It makes it easier for child labor laws and touring and things like that. But that being said, no, that kind of thing was done a lot. Okay, we put him in, let's give him a small deal, give him some money to record, put him in the studio with the producer and see what happens. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. If it does, awesome. Then we sign a regular deal and boom, but the label took the chance. They had the, you know, they had the cojones to put their money.
The foresight.
Yes.
To put their money all in. Yeah, it's like going into a casino. You know, it's like we're gonna take a shot on you. We're gonna throw dice and we'll see if we hit 7. You know? Because
you know what? As good as an artist is, it's a crapshoot in this business. You know, there has to be all the elements and the time and the perseverance. There's a lot of elements into what makes a successful artist's career. And you could, I've seen, you know, we've all seen it many times, amazing talents who didn't because for whatever reason, it didn't all come together. Well, so for a label to say, okay, we're going to drop $250,000 on a development deal, that was, you know, that was something. So, and very often, you know, I'd say the average development deals were somewhere between, like 100 and maybe 300 grand, because that's how, I mean, studio time was expensive. Engineers were expensive. Tape, a bloody roll of tape. Remember, we used to pay $150 to $200 for a roll of tape that would give us 15 minutes of music.
Yeah, we used to complain, and now try to buy that same tape. Now it's out of control.
But now we have a hard drive that holds countless hours of music that we pay $100 for.
And remember,
and even then, remember tones? You had to have tones and the record pad, so that cut into your 15 minutes of music too.
Wait. And print through. Oh God, imagine what that happened. Print through. I don't even want to go down that road. Oh God. So, but no, I'm glad you explained what an artist development deal is, because there's a lot of young people that watch the show, and their idea of artist development is they buy Spotify followers, they buy these Russian followers for this and Russian for that and Chinese things for this, because you see it. You have it to $5, you get 5,000 plays. And at the end of the day, they have a bunch of people sitting in a room at these major labels that are hacking and looking to see if these algorithms are real. They know, they could see all that because the majors have the power to look at everything. Whereas an independent record label owner, you don't have that same visual that they can see as far as looking at an artist if you're going to invest in somebody, you know?
Sure.
But here we go. So now, being that you were a band guy, Justin introduces you to the studio sense of the remixing production side.
Yep.
When do you start to gain Eric Kupper's professional, like where the sponge begins? Who was that guy that that you were like, oh wow, this this some people I worked with that I saw things and we all grab. It's just part of our game. You with great engineers, you should start to pull their, some of their talent towards your way. Where was that for you?
It was everyone I worked with. The engineers for sure, because I was always the guy. Like in my band, I was the guy who normally manned the 4-track reel to reel. I remember experimenting with mics and miking up instruments and stuff like that. And I was doing that when I was a little kid. I had a boombox and a regular tape deck, and the tape deck had mic input, so you could record while you were bouncing the boombox over. So I was doing multi-track stuff that way. So I was always into the technical side of things. So I would be picking the engineers' brains, watching what they were doing. And also just like on the MIDI side, when I first started doing sessions with Justin, I was playing stuff live. I didn't know how to hook up a MIDI cable and sequence and stuff like that. And then I started doing it, and there were guys like Mac Quayle, if you remember Mac, in New York.
Was Mac on a lot of my records. That's a great guy.
Yeah. Mac was the guy that you went to when you had a question about MIDI.
Isn't that? Everybody says it. Here we go. Where's Mac? Call Mac now. Mac.
Yeah, exactly, man. I learned a lot from him. And eventually you learn by doing. I remember sitting there with the SBX80, which was the sync machine that we used to have to sync to lock up MIDI to tape. Punching in stuff by hand. I got to the point where I would literally be able to do an entire record by hand. It took a lot of time. It took like 5-6 hours of work, but sometimes you had to do that when you were dealing with live instruments on the original tape. But the engineers I learned so much from, and just watching them as well. And I was not shy about asking questions, not shy at all. And I had a few bits of gear of my own. At that point, I think I had an 8-track. I had one digital reverb, a compressor, a dual compressor, and that was it at home.
People, that's an 8-track cart machine he's talking about. He's talking about an 8-track reel to reel.
Yeah, I'm talking about. I had an 8-track. It was this all-in-one thing. It was called the Studio 8 by Tascam, and it had like a 1/4-inch, like under the hood. You flipped it up almost like it was a big cassette, but there was a little reel to reel in there, and it had 8 channels. 3-band sweep EQ on each channel, which was cool. So it really kind of taught me the ins and outs of working with a console, even though it was small. But just on the big consoles, what I learned, you look at those big consoles, everyone says, how do you know how to work all those knobs? I go, you see, take an 1.5 inch strip of that. You learn that, and you pretty much know everything else. It's just one thing duplicated how many times. So I made sure I figured out what every damn button on the consoles in the studios I was working in, what they did. And I would feed off the assistant engineers, the producers I was working with. Some were more technically adept, and some were more vibe people. So, I really fed off everybody in our scene. And I think that was the beauty of it. We all kind of nurtured each other.
Right, because pre to that, there was no such thing like this. There was no such thing as remixing like this. Tom Moulton did the remixes, and he worked out of one or two studios in Philly, and he had a great staff of people. That was in the 70s. There was no electronic gear like the 80s and 90s had. Digital, MIDI. That wasn't until 86 or 85, if I remember correctly. The first MIDI keyboards were actually around. It was actually, if I remember correctly, it was a thing called CV. So you'd have one keyboard lock up with electrical signals. It was a CV thing, with the keyboards.
And which is coming back big time now. I have a Eurorack system over here.
Right.
And everything is what they call CV and gate. And you also had Roland had their own clock system where you'd be able to clock from one Roland machine to another. And then there was also a clock output where you could, in theory, like lock up a Lindrum and an 808 and a couple other things. It was primitive. You kind of cross your fingers and hope it would work. And it worked sometimes. And you had to make sure you were in record all the time if you were recording to tape. You got that one tape that actually everything synced up nice, good. But
hopefully.
yeah, exactly. But yeah, there was a lot of tape cutting up, even like in the 80s and 90s when I was working with Justin and everybody else. We got the masters, say, for a 4-minute pop song, 3-minute pop song to remix. Well, how are you going to make that into a 7-minute, 8-minute, plus record? You would have to make different passes. You'd make the main body pass with the main music in it. You'd make an intro pass. You'd make an outro pass. You maybe make a break pass. You'd make all these little things and you'd edit them together because you didn't have, just the ability to cut and paste. It wasn't until I'd say, the early 90s where I had an S1000 with enough memory in it to sample the entire vocal. And I could put the entire vocal in there and then arrange from there and not have to deal with the limitations of tape. And I remember hearing Steve Hurley, his mix of Clubland, hold on tighter. Hold on tight, or hold on, whatever. Hold on, I think it's called. And he not only did he rearrange it, he took one line from like the B section or something and made it into the chorus, and kind of flipped the chorus from that record was not used on his version. But when I heard how he did that, I was like, okay, this is what has to be done now. We need this complete freedom. I don't want to be stuck to what's on tape. I want to be able to mess with stuff. I want to be able to and retime things too. If a word or a phrase isn't grooving with what I'm doing, I could chop that up into little bits and replay it on the keyboard and make it, groove to my thing. So that was a big moment in technical history, I'd say, is when samplers, we're talking 32 megabytes too.
Ooh, that was expensive.
Card
that was expensive upgrade.
Each 8 megabyte card was $800. I still have my S1000 in storage because that cost me more than a lot of cards I bought. It's like it's wild how and a lot of people don't even understand what a megabyte is anymore because it's been so.
When you're talking terabytes now, a megabyte sounds like air.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. A megabyte back then was big real estate. Big.
Yeah. We were dealing with kilobytes back on the floppy disks, and that was that we got a lot of stuff on one little floppy disk. So that when the digital world started meeting the analog world, that was the big game change right there. That was the big.
So Steve, I could tell you that Steve Hurley definitely a game changing guy in a lot of different ways, and I heard that from other people as we interviewed. E. Smooth said the same. Other people always talk about Hurley and Marshall Jefferson as well as being serious game changers because they were taking things, making coolness out of non-musical parts as well. That's another thing where we were starting to first hear non-musical parts become part of the integral part of the production now. Where it was pre to that, everything was perfectly laid out. Like you said, some keyboard players in those days, you couldn't get them to play simplified like that. They'd be like, "Get out of here, dude! Come on now."
Exactly.
Like this bull. That's like class 101. Like bum 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 bum. But yet we and all Clubland were loving it.
Yep.
They were buying the records. So what's the first big remix that you touch that becomes synonymous? I could have been with Def Mix or whoever it was, but what was the first big one for you that you played on? Everybody said, "Oh wow, Eric, I Want You Now."
It was probably the third or fourth record I did. It was with Justin, and it was a freestyle record. It was In Love with Love, Debbie Harry, the Pop Stand remix, and it became a number one. It was my first number one Billboard record, and I think that opened up a lot of doors. I definitely do. Guys like Louis Vega, he was doing freestyle at the time. A lot of people were doing freestyle music. There was a lot of people that did a little of both. But, you know, I remember, yeah, I mean, house was around, and it was just in this evolution at that time. We're talking about like 86 in New York. And while it was a force, it was a very underground force still. And it wasn't really starting to solidify, I'd say, until about 87. For me, at least, in the clubs. I could be wrong. You're going to probably say, no, E, you're wrong. But as a solid genre where you could go to hear an entire set of nothing but house music, it was 86, 87 to me. I'm not sure if I'm right there.
No, you're about right.
Okay.
And it depends which demographic club you were in.
Yes.
You know, because like if you went to some place like the Paradise Garage, no, you didn't hear freestyle. It may be one record, not the whole night.
Exactly. Oh yeah, of course.
If you went to Palladium,
the Garage is known for its eclectic.
Right. If you went to Palladium,
I'm saying to go to hear just house music alone, nothing but.
There wasn't enough house music to play through the whole night yet either.
Yeah, that's true.
At that time, there wasn't enough that would be acceptable to play. I got fired for playing house music from Bear Jones. I tell that story all the time from the underground. He didn't want to hear that music, and he didn't want me to play it to the people.
Wow.
It's a different time those days. It was different. They wanted to hear, you know, Yaz and Situation. They didn't want to hear Move Your Body. Even though it's a great song, but you know, it was a little bit of some coaxing that had to be done to get these people to understand this music was taking over.
It was a more raw sound too. It really was. It was, you know, you listen to Situation. These are properly produced records. These are not guys in basements or even in proper studios. They sounded raw, you know, they really did. So it was definitely, it was a learning curve for me too, because, you know, I had to, not that I'm really that studied. I mean, I actually do have a degree in classical music theory and I can't read a note. I just, you know, fake my way through the whole damn thing. Just doing stuff by ear. But I did have to unlearn certain things. And I always talk about the key of DJ. You know, that key where an a cappella is playing over a record that's in the wrong key, but it still sounds cool. That is the key of DJ. You know what I mean? And so you have to be able to kind of take yourself out of that. Well, these two notes don't work together because they're not in the same key and blah, blah, blah.
Oh, yeah.
If it sounds good, it's good, man. If it sounds cool. And that's where it took me kind of experimenting to kind of unlearn certain things as well. Just to kind of say, okay, anything goes. Let me just try that. And it's like, you know what? That wrong chord sounds better than the right one.
You know, that's the thing, because most guys that were coming up didn't know how to play keys. So they were just taking a cappellas and putting these chords that they would sample and then play them on the keyboard. And if it didn't make sense or not, as long as it sounded well, that it gelled well together.
Exactly.
And people went crazy. That's what truly was happening.
Yeah. And samples
graffiti,
too. People
mixing with real stuff, with graffiti, like in art. It's like you got to take this beautiful picture and throw graffiti on top of it. That's what it's like to say. And everybody's like, "Yo, that's the greatest thing ever." Some people said it was garbage. We thought it was amazing.
Yeah.
You know, compare,
yeah.
That's.
And we also got to talk about hip hop there, because hip hop with its sampling and sometimes the discord that created from, mixing these samples, the dissonance was fantastic. And I think that also, obviously, hip hop influenced house music. A lot of house music people, obviously like Todd Terry would be the most.
Oh, Todd Terry and Kenny Dope. Those two are
exactly.
master guys. Mom Van Helden.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Taking samples with a hip hop approach, but making house music with it. And we're not talking about hip house either. That's a whole different thing. But we're talking about taking a hip hop sampling approach to house music, which was amazing.
Unprecedented, right? For its time.
it's an art form in itself. You know, I mean, got like Todd Edwards. I mean, that guy, what he can do with samples is just blows my mind. Just blows my mind.
He's remixed some of my records, and I'm hearing these tracks come back years and years ago. And I'm going, where the hell did he find that in my track? You know, I know what he did, but I'm like, where is he hearing that? Because that's how his brain works. It's the same with Kenny Dope. How does he make that SP1200 8-bit drum machine sound so freaking fat? Yeah, right. And but yet, I'd rather have the drums laid out on a keyboard and program them into the sequencer. Where, say, like I spoke to Kenny about this, he would rather have the drum machine with the quantizer Roger Lynn, that feel, and do it right on the drum machine and lock his stuff up. And for me, it's cumbersome working on that machine. He's like, bro, it's easy for me. So it depends on how your brain operates and how workflow is for you, you know?
No, I used to be a drum machine guy, and sometimes I miss it. Like for a while, I had the MPC, the Renaissance in my studio. And it was fun working in that mode again, because it is kind of like simple and quick. You take a 4-bar thing, you bang out some stuff, erase this note, hit this one, you hit this one by mistake, and you go, oh, that's awesome too. And there's a lot of kind of fun trial and error in that kind of thing. When you're doing it with a keyboard, there's more, there can be more thought involved. You have to kind of plan out stuff more. Whereas when you're doing it on a drum machine, there is more on the fly feel. It's like boom, boom. Now, yes, delete this note. And there's something to it, man. There's something to it. And I have a little electrode here, a little Korg electrode, which is a drum machine, and sometimes I program on that and will trigger other sounds with it. And, if I'm in that kind of mode. But normally, I pretty much know what I want before that.
And you want it.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of get that. I kind of do things in my head before I actually lay them out.
And why is that? Think about that for a second. Why do you do that?
Very good question. Because although sometimes I do like to go in the studio just with a clean slate and experiment, that's not usually my modus operandi. Usually it's like I have an idea and I'll flesh it out in my head. Like I always say, when I'm not working, I'm still working. When I'm sitting out on my porch, watching the sunset, I'm thinking about a record. I'm kind of planning it out in my head. So when I do go in the studio, boom, it's like I can get it done. And I'd say about 90% of the time it comes out the way I envisioned it. And sometimes it still comes out good, but it kind of took its own course in the studio. Kind of like, whoa, okay, I didn't realize that was going to happen. I didn't envision that. But I don't know. I don't know why I do it, how I do it, whatever, but it just seems to be my method of making music, because I've always been very analytical. That's why I say I don't dance. When I'm at a club, I don't dance. I listen. And I think I'm always analyzing music, even when I'm not making music. Somehow I just have this kind of musically analytical brain.
Well, there's two things I want to say. Then we're going to go to our sponsors and play their commercials. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail, of course. And back in the old days, when we had budgets that we had to work in rooms, you had to have a good plan to walk in with. You couldn't go in there unless you're the Stones, unless you're Rolling Stones, and you bought a year, and you can actually have caviar dreams and champagne every day and not worry about the time clock. You were at home planning your sessions. So I understand why you still do that, because that's,
you know what? I didn't even think of that. Yeah. You had to have you were in there. You didn't have an infinite budget. And you also had time. You can say, okay, I got a session for tracking and a session for mixing. Period. Done.
Eric,
and that's,
they will say this to you. Here's the money. Make it work.